All right, I think you can start, Juliana.
All right, thank you, Roberto. Welcome everybody to our online course and workshop for a Manifesto for the Just City, organized by TU Delft in collaboration with several universities around the world, the UN Habitat World Campaign to commemorate Urban October, and the Pakhuis Zwijger, a cultural platform in Amsterdam that hosts activities connected to the topic of cities for all. My name is Juliana Gonçalves, and I am here with my colleagues Hugo Lopes, Andres Maglione, Roberto Rocco, and Caroline Newton. Together, we are members of the Center for the Just City, a center set up at the Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment at TU Delft to research and debate social sustainability and spatial justice. We are thrilled to have you here today and happy that many of you have also decided to participate in our call to write a manifesto for the Just City. I'd like to remind you that this event is broadcast live on YouTube and being recorded for the podcast Duty of Care, our podcast on issues of the Just City, produced by Roberto Rocco and Hugo Lopes. There are several episodes already available at the link that is going to be on the chat. Today, if we wish to speak about the Just City, we cannot ignore the conflicts that knocked at our doors. The conflicts in Ukraine, Nagorno-Karabakh, Myanmar, Darfur, Iran, Ethiopia, and more recently, Palestine and Israel. In the strongest possible terms, we condemn the attacks on innocent civilians by all parties, the indiscriminate bombing of civilian targets, and the cutting of crucial infrastructure in the region. As the humanitarian crisis unfolds, our hearts are with the affected communities. At the same time, we are astonished at the inaction of the world governments in using diplomacy to protect the vulnerable people and open and safeguard humanitarian corridors. As scholars and students addressing justice, we want Palestinians to live, and we also want Israelis to live. This life is only possible if we embrace politics, the politics of negotiation that seeks compromise, respect for human life, and peace. Now, Andres will take us to today's subject and speaker.
Thank you very much, Juliana, and thank you for those important remarks. In our last lecture, our guest Faiza offered us a deeply moving presentation, passionately talking about the intersection between women's rights and environmental justice in Afghanistan. Today's topic is about poverty alleviation, co-creation, and social sustainability. We are very glad to have with us Montagu Murray. This is an exceptional guest of us that will take us on these topics. Dr. Murray attained a DD degree in Systematic Theology from the University of Pretoria, South Africa. His academic studies included pre-graduate studies in Minnesota in the USA and postgraduate research in the universities of Utrecht and Leiden in the Netherlands. He is a research associate in the Faculty of Theology of the University of Pretoria, and he's particularly interested in the transdisciplinary approaches for poverty alleviation, quality of life, improvement of life, and sustainability, sustainable lifestyles. Dr. Murray's notable achievements include receiving the 3 Excellence Award from the South African Ministry of Trade and Industry, and as a member of the Functional Household Program team, and the recognition of the National Association for Clean Air in 2018 for his contributions to improving air quality and in low-income South African communities with the NOVA team. With over 20 years of experience in developing quality of life solutions for low-income households in Southern Africa context, he currently serves as the CEO of the NOVA Institute. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to you, Montagu. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And as I mentioned just a few minutes ago when we were waiting for this session to start. It's a great privilege for me to be part of a platform like this and to present to you what we are doing and to think together with you, further think together with you, about what it might entail and mean. I'm going to share my screen. Let me just get the correct screen here. There we go. And please let me know if you can see the screen.
We can see the screen, yes.
Okay. So let me start. My presentation will be, I think, will be the full 35 to 40 minutes, hopefully, and then because there's quite a lot of information that I would like to share with you. So please, but when we get close to the time, Roberto, please feel free to remind me that I have to conclude. I actually thought about a title for this presentation, and I call the presentation Towards a Place to Feel at Home. Imagine low-income households breathing clean air. And I got my inspiration for this specific title actually from Juliana, a quote from Juliana in the Spatial Justice as a Praxis of Solidarity in Everyday Life. And she says, for as much as the academic discourse around questions of spatial justice might sound abstract, the consequences of injustice are very much in everyday life, the transportation and health systems we use. I'm just struggling here to see. I just want to minimize this little screen here. The injustices are very much material in everyday life, the transportation and health systems we use, the house we live in, the productive and reproductive work we do, and so on. Addressing injustices thus means imagining another everyday life. And I think that is what I would like to do with you today when I talk about air quality. So the first part of the presentation would be quite theoretical, and then it would become quite more practical. I will then talk about the particular programs that we work on in air quality offset programs, and then lastly, I will conclude the presentation with some practical samples of some of the surveys that we are doing. So just to start off with the Nvao Institute, the Nvao Institute was established in 1994 as a not-for-profit company and with a vision of a healthy household culture in Southern Africa. So we decided to focus on the household as a social institution because it's not really ultimately the state or the church or non-governmental organizations that does the most for quality of life of households and families, but it's mostly families and households themselves that actually care for their members. And that's why we wanted to understand better how the household as a social institution functions and works. And so we also say to each other that our overarching goal is to be the professional partner of choice for households and other stakeholders working towards improving quality of life in low-income communities in a responsible way. Our approach then is also that the mother in the kitchen and the professor at the university must agree that a stove works as it should. What that means is that often, for example, in the academic world, the product that one produces might be an academic article or scientific article or the training of students, but in the context of designing solutions for households, the product has to be a practice that works in the context of the household itself. I also was inspired by one of the quote from Caroline that says we must recognize our roles as proactive participants within the process of urban development, grounded not just in the technical aspects of our practice, but also in a clear set of values. These values aren't external constructs, but rather integral elements woven into our professional identity, shaping our perspectives and driving our actions. As such, they are situated within a broader humanistic framework inspired by deep understanding of and empathy for the diverse range of human experiences that occur within cities. So, taking her emphasis on values, I would like to also share our values as Nvao with you, and also in this presentation, hopefully you will also get an idea of how these values actually plays a role in the decisions we have to make when we work on air quality. So as an organization, we follow a transdisciplinary approach where solutions to improve quality of life are co-created with households and stakeholders, and we work towards building Nvao as a resilient organization. So resilience is important because the organization can only, continue with its vision as long as it exists. So it's very important for us to survive in the first place. And in order to do so, you have to have a competent team, and you have to be open to new opportunities. That means one have to be innovative and constantly try to improve with solutions. And we also are guided by our core values, in which is we ask ourselves the question, am I compassionately doing what is right? Now, that's very relevant in air quality offsets. You will see a bit later, the government has certain policies, and you have to decide, are you, for example, willing to work with a large industry, or are you just going to criticize the industry for the way that it functions, or are you taking a more pragmatic approach and try and see if they are making an investment, can you do the most with that particular investment? Am I applying scientific methods? That's very important to us to be rigorous because it's important for all stakeholders. I mean, when human health, for example, is at stake, you want to make sure that the methods that you are using is scientific. Am I effective? That's something that links quite a lot with business culture, whereas scientific methods, I think, links with institutions such as a university. And to do what is right is an ethical, thing. And then lastly, also, am I delighted in my work? I think if you like what you are doing, you are much more motivated. And I think for this program where you are working on manifestos, it will make a huge difference. I mean, if you're just completing a manifesto because you have to, it's totally different than really getting inspired and really, putting something of yourself into it. And then lastly, do what we say and say what we do. Do what we say is the whole issue of trust. I mean, if you have clients, you want to keep with your word, and you have to be trustworthy so that they ask you again to work for them. And say what we do, communication, internal and external communication is very important. Now, I just quickly want to say, can I just hear, Roberto, are you still there?
Yes, we are here.
Yes. Oh, sorry. I just want to, I cannot.
We are here. Yes. Sorry.
Okay, thanks.
I was
want to
muted.
make
That's
sure.
why I took some time.
I cannot always see you on screen with a small little screen, so I just want to check every 10 minutes that I'm not talking with myself. So now I would just also like to say something about our approach, maybe almost more philosophically, because I think that will also enable you a little bit better to evaluate what we are doing when I get to the more practical side of the things we are doing. So just in terms of our views with regard to development, so Francis Fukuyama says to study development is to study the change in human societies over time. So that's quite a broad definition. One, also particularly in economic development, there's a nuance of advancement, of to progress with someone or something, and to grow kind of as you go over time. So that there you can see the Cambridge definition has that element of growth in it. And I would just briefly like to say something about the 50s, the 80s, and the turn of the century. So in terms of the development economics, in the 50s, you had that the famous speech of Harry Truman in his inaugural speech, the American president, when he became American president. He said, more than half of the people of the world are living in conditions approaching misery. I believe that we should make available to peace-loving people the benefits of our store of technical knowledge in order to help them realize their aspirations for a better life. Greater production is the key to prosperity and peace, and the key to greater production is a wider and more vigorous application of modern scientific technical knowledge. So as you can see, there was quite a positive attitude towards and a belief in what technology can do to uplift poverty and inequality, which is I think what we are talking about also when we now reflect on spatial justice. And we all know that it was maybe too optimistic, you know, and this type of optimistic approach was continued with when Kennedy proclaimed in the 1960s the development decade and increased the budget for foreign assistance. In the later 70s, closer to the 80s, I think people became more and more aware that development cannot be equated with just with with economic growth. And so one academic or one philosopher and economist that I'm quite fond of is the work of Manfred Max Neef. And Max Neef takes Aristotle's distinction between oikonomia, the art of household management, and chrematistike, the art of accusation, and he says the reduction of economics to chrematistics has shaped the modern idea of development by equating it to growth in monetary terms. And he takes a critical stance towards that and says it should be the other way around. The economy should serve the people, and the best development process will be that which allows the greatest improvement in people's quality of life. And then Max Neef works out the quality, what it means, and quality of life for Max Neef is the satisfaction of fundamental human needs. Fundamental human needs are universal values, and satisfiers are existential categories. It has its ways of being, doing, having, and interacting. And then he has a whole, you know, interesting way of working it out. And we've also used Max Neef theory quite a bit in developing our own instruments further. I'll show you a bit later on when we get there. And then also the approach of Sen and Nussbaum that you know about, capabilities to achieve a fulfilling life, the freedom to choose, various options is there was, you know, that insight broke through. And then around the turn of the century, I think the whole concept of sustainable development is becoming more and more important. So sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So in the language of what we are reflecting on, if we say that spatial justice also has to do with a place to feel at home, then it means future generations should also be able to feel at home on the Earth system as well as locally. And then the concept of planetary well-being, which I like a lot. I think the post-30 agenda will move in the direction of not sustainable development goals, but planetary well-being. So planetary well-being, according to Onto et al., is the highest attainable standard of well-being for human and non-human beings and their social and natural systems. So I think the progress is here from just focusing on economic growth, moving towards quality of life and human needs, moving towards also saying, yes, human needs remains important, but we also have to think of the planet. And then the whole concept of the Anthropocene, coined by Crutzen and Stormer in 2000 to denote the present geological time interval in which many conditions and processes on Earth are profoundly altered by human impact. And they proposed a new epoch to be added to a geological time scale, succeeding the Holocene, which was the last 10,000 years of quite stable climate. And interesting, Clive Hamilton, in his book, obviously there's many opinions and some people will not agree with Hamilton's view, but what Hamilton says is it's not just the continued spread of the human impacts on the landscapes that are at stake here, but we are actually talking about the whole Earth system, and there's a rupture in the functioning of the Earth system as a whole. So much so that it's a first time that the human species actually impacting the whole Earth system. And he goes on by saying the arrival of the Anthropocene contradicts all narratives, philosophies, and theologies that of a preordained and continuous rise of humankind to ever higher levels of material, social, and spiritual development. We must learn to live on this world as it really is. So what I was trying to do with this theoretical part is to show that, you know, at some point in time, people were thinking of development as just a continuous, almost linear progress going forward with modern technology. But I think more and more we are realizing that it's a really complex issues that we are dealing with when we think about the whole Earth system. And then also a quote from Roberto that's joining us tonight. If public discourse is driven by short-term bias, sensationalism, and distortion, or if it's smothered by political confusion and violence, it becomes difficult to address complex, slow-developing challenges that require sustained effort and rational analysis anchored on evidence. And I think the formulation that Roberto has made here is exactly what we are, in a certain sense, trying to do. So my conclusion from this, let's call it then more theoretical part, is that to learn to live in this world, as Hamilton says, and to work towards sustained effort and rational analysis anchored on evidence, as Roberto says, they are tough tasks. And there's no place for arrogance or triumphalism in tackling these tough tasks. We have to learn as we go. So to link up then now again with Juliana's suggestion of everyday life, imagine low-income households breathing clean air. Now I would like to say something about the problem of air pollution in dense low-income settlements in South Africa and how we are trying to tackle this complex problem, you know, in the manner that we've just reflected on theoretically. So in the first place, the reason why this happens is because of energy poverty. So what happens is energy poverty is a lack of access to modern energy services. And you often found in these households, when you get there, that people stack energy. So you'll find that even houses where there's electricity, it may be prepaid electricity, and when the prepaid money runs out, people may revert to wood that is for free, or sometimes if there's very low, bad thermal efficiency of the homes, people might revert to the cheapest way of heating the house. Or sometimes people might heat water for bathing outside on an open fire. There's all different reasons why people stack energy. And then what you also found in these communities is often a lack of waste removal services. So the only way to manage your waste, your domestic waste, is to either dump it in public, or to dump it in public and then burn it, or to burn the waste on your own stand. And those are the types of things that we look at. So how does the air quality program work? So I'm not going to look at the technical definition here, but in short, it's quite complex, but in short, from a human health perspective, you often find that because the human lungs are close to where the emissions are when people make fires in their home, you find that the health impact in many instances can be tenfold or 20 or even much more worse than the high emissions that is dispersed quite well, the high stack emissions of industries. And in South Africa, there's one policy mechanism which they call offsets, where they make room for a situation where an industry can invest in cleaning up a low-income community with exponentially better health outcome than when they would have immediately complied. So they will typically give a brief postponement for the industry before they have to comply with the minimum emission standard. But like I said, it's quite an interesting and a complex discussion, because the way in which the minimum emission standards are determined has to do with the available technology, whereas the air quality regulations is often related to human health impacts. There it is important to make sure that these things are being done scientifically, and that is what we also try to do. So how does the air quality offset program work? So typically you would have a preparation phase, you would have a baseline establishment, and I'll say something what we do in the baselines. Then you will have the intervention development process, where you have to find the intervention that have to comply with certain criteria. Then you have your implementation, and then you will have impact monitoring and evaluation. So the baseline establishment, I'm not going to be too long on this one, but you need that information to identify the sources of the emissions and to understand the drivers. Just to give a very practical example, if you have a community of, let's say, 20,000 households or 80,000 people, and you want to know how many of those households make fire with wood. And then you also need to know, if you want to design an intervention, do people make wood to heat water, or do they use wood for cooking, or do they use wood for space heating, or a combination of all three? Because in all those instances, you will have to design different solutions if you want to actually get be successful in terms of impacting successfully on the usage pattern of the end user. Then there's intervention development. Usually an intervention will be feasible if it reduces emissions sufficiently. It has to have a positive or at least neutral quality of life impact on the end user. And that is tremendously important, because one cannot intervene in low-income households practices if you and not make sure that, for example, it cannot be more expensive for a household post-intervention to have the same utility than pre-intervention. And those kinds of things, it's very important to check that. And then the monitoring and evaluation. Now I'm going to give you a few practical survey results, just show you how we do it. So when we do a comprehensive baseline, it is quite comprehensive. We would typically do, we often work in transdisciplinary teams, and then we will get, when we do the technical ambient air quality monitoring, we often work with knowledge institutions like universities to do the ambient air quality monitoring, and sometimes the indoor air quality monitoring, and sometimes even chemical source apportionment. And we would typically do the comprehensive household surveys, the household interviews, the group interviews, the management of the whole program. And then we would also do things like, for example, solid fuel use monitoring. We would have a public and domestic waste analysis to look at the compositions of the waste. We would sometimes do remote sensing and satellite imaging, and we would do traffic measurements. So to cover all the sources in a community. This is an example of, I know it's very small. You don't have to see all the detail. I'll show a next slide where we look at some of it. But I just wanted to show that a comprehensive household survey would typically include the type of indicators that you find in a census. So there's demographic, health and well-being, services and infrastructure, and so on. The demographic are quite important because you can imagine, though, if you have a larger families, the waste per capita would, for example, be higher. In dense areas, the air pollution has a certain impact. The energy needs of a family of 2 is different than the energy needs of a family of 6. All these kinds of information are important for us to plan the intervention as well as to measure impacts. If you look at the health and well-being, we would typically also include satisfaction type of questions in these larger samples. I think this was I don't know if it is visible to you, but I know that this is a very interesting thing. We did a baseline in 2013 for this community, a very comprehensive baseline, and then we repeated the impact measurement in 2022, 10 years later. And so we have all the indicators for 2013 as well as for 2022, which makes it very interesting because it's quite large samples. For example, in 2022 was 1,200 sample in this community, and I cannot see the one sample in front of me at the moment, but it's more than 600 households. Yeah, so this is health and well-being type of indicators, and this is the services indicators are very important. Just to give you one indication, just one example here, if you look at indicator C8, that's access to waste collection service. What is interesting in community 2, for example, in 2013, 100% of households had access to waste collection, and that figure went down to 75% in 2022. And in the other community, it was 97% in 2013, and it went down to 74% in 2022. The reason for that was actually an increase in informality. There was about, I think, 6,000 informal houses that were erected in that time period. And where the informal settlements formed, they don't have formal access to waste collection at the moment. And you can imagine what the impact is, because then people have to manage their waste and they burn their waste typically. We don't have to look at the detail here, but I just wanted to show you that when we gather information on waste burning and domestic burning, and so the devil is in the detail. You want to know you don't only want to know how many households, you want to know the quantities, you want to know about seasonality. Are people only burning in winter and summer? You want to know the number of households, want to know the proportions also. So there's quite a lot of detail. I cannot also, just in the interest of time, I cannot talk about this slide, but this is also just to show that the devil is in the detail. We do all our questionnaires. We train people from local communities to do the questionnaires on mobile phones with GIS functionality. So then we can also map things. So you can see in the map above that the yellow part is the density of coal burning. And you can see in the bottom part, the blue is the informal areas and the reddish type of color is the more formal areas. So you can see that in this particular community, coal burning is an informal problem. So you can actually see where people are burning coal. So if you design an intervention, you have to design an intervention that's appropriate for the informal area. This is a similar type of a map for waste. Here you can see that the purple areas are areas where people do not have access to waste collection service, and the yellow here is where more than 50% of households reported that they burn their waste. And the bluish is also where people are burning. So once again, you can see that most of the burning takes place in the informal areas. It's not always like that. This is another way we sometimes present. This is a Sankey type of presentation. So we are not interested only in the amount of waste that is generated. We also want to know from an air quality perspective how much of the waste actually gets burned actively, but also once every now and then. So here you can see in this community, in the formal areas, this is formal houses, there's also quite a bit of dumping and burning. So in this particular community, waste is not only an informal problem. This actually shows that there's actually a waste delivery failure problem. The service provider is not doing their job, most probably. This is a community where waste is an informal problem. Here you can see that most of the waste that gets dumped come from informal houses. This is just a picture of some of the waste heaps. We would typically log these heaps also, and then we do time series. We monitor what happens with these heaps. How often do they burn? When does waste get taken away? When does waste get added? And then when you understand the situation, it is often easier to address it. This is a subjective quality of life. We are asked domain satisfaction. We would typically ask people, how satisfied are you with the air you breathe or the water you have on a scale 0 to 10 in these larger samples? This was a sample of 1,085 households. And here you can see in 4 communities, you can see air quality here was very low. Discovery has to do with education, the structure of the house, etc. But this is domain satisfaction. That's one of the ways in which we bring more qualitative type of perceptions into discussion with more quantitative. There's not time to look at this, but we did write the article on this in the Journal of Sustainable Development, but this is how we do qualitative analysis. Then we also do particular impact on quality of life. I've got another, I'll be through in 5 minutes. This is most of the time in research, you actually know what you should have asked after you've done the research. So it's very important to generate the best possible questions as early as possible. So we have a tool that helps us to generate questions. And we would typically ask narrative type of questions, and then we have satisfaction ratings, and I'll just quickly show you an example of each. So we usually would always start as open as possible. If we want to know something about water in our households, we will just ask the respondent, can you please tell me about the water you have? And then a respondent will reflect on it, and we will use typical qualitative probing techniques. But after that, you sometimes want to know more specific information about water. Do people pay for water? How does the water taste? Are there any conflicts about water, etc.? But then you have a way of asking other questions. This is example of some of solutions we tested recently in some programs. Here we had, this is quite a large structure. In the implementation phase, it will be a bit not as elaborate. But the reason here was for orientation and the roof integrity of the houses are such that it's better that these solar water heaters stand on their own stands. This is just an example of narrative feedback. I cannot, in the interest of time, go through this, but one person, for example, says, I feel like a real human in South Africa. That's a positive type of feedback, but you get all kinds. This is a box plot of, we asked on a scale of 0 to 10, how satisfied are you that your family can bath the way you want to? And you can see the blue is the pre-intervention answer, and the red is the post-intervention answer, and this line is the median score. So you can see here, pre-intervention, the median score was 5 out of 10. Post-intervention, it went up to 10 out of 10. It's not always like that. This is a community where the pre-intervention and post-intervention box plots did not change much. We will also sometimes use the technique of Likert style type of questions. In this particular instance, you can see I sometimes worry that I can get burned when I work with hot water in my house. So pre-intervention, more than 80% of the respondents, it's not a very large sample. This was just a sample of 17, were worried about safety, but post-intervention, the safety situation was better. This is just lastly, and I'm 2 minutes from finish. This is just lastly to show that perceptions of households is not always the only thing that one have to consider. So in this particular program, we tested rocket stoves. So the pre-intervention situation was an open fire outside, but some people took the rocket stoves indoors, which from a thermal comfort perspective is very comfortable to the end user, but from a health perspective, it is very, very bad to take an open fire indoors. So this particular intervention, is that not will never, we immediately in such an instance have to go back to the household and warn them not to do it. And make sure that things like that. And I'm quite concerned that in some of the carbon programs, this type of thing may actually also happen. This is just, we sometimes place sensors. This is each one of these represents a household. So we place temperature sensors on the stove. So this zigzag is just the ambient temperature fluctuation. And where you see these spikes is where people are actually using these stoves. And what we found is that these stoves often are not used. Rarely or not at all. This is in 5 samples of 20 each. We found that people do not use actually this rocket stove. And if you ask them if they use this rocket stove, they will say yes, because they feel polite, or they may feel they received it for free. But if you place the sensors on the stove and you triangulate the information, you actually realize that people are not using those stoves. And then to conclude, we recently did a program where we assisted a large industry to implement, improved retrofitting of thermal insulation on what you call in South Africa RDP house. That is a simple, a very smallish formal house, but they were actually built without ceilings. And then the program went and put in ceilings, and there was a stove swap, and it was very, so we got the chance to go back 3 to 5 years later, and the retention rate was very high. 97% of addresses still did not use coal. So this is one of the highest retention rates that we've actually ever got. And the reason for that is we worked at addresses. So even when the owner changes, the new owners that came into the house also did not revert to coal use. So that was a very successful project. There's also a link with a paper, conference proceeding paper that we actually reflected on it. yeah, so this is my lot. So to conclude, towards a place to feel at home, imagine low-income households breathing clean air. I think, you know, we've got a very long way to go, and the whole issue of air quality in dense low-income settlements in South Africa is a tremendously complex problem. But I think, you know, at some point one have to try and do what you can and see and measure the results and try your best to see if you cannot get to a situation where the post-intervention situation is better to the end users than the pre-intervention situation. Yes, so with that, I will conclude.
Thank you so much, Montagu. If you want to stop sharing,
Yes,
so we can see each other.
Let me just get to the right place. Stop sharing. There we go.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all these very interesting cases, a lot of information. I'm very surprised by the amount of methods that you use to survey and to you really want to know if the intervention made or had an effect, had a positive impact. So I was curious if you could talk to us a little bit about how you get people to answer the surveys and the questionnaires, and how do you engage them in these processes?
Yes. Yeah, so usually before the study, we also will do ethical clearance with a university just as a start, but the whole stakeholder engagement process is very important. So before you can start a program, and it differs quite a lot depending on where you work. So closer to larger cities, it's often a bit more formal with municipality and other stakeholders, but when it gets to more rural areas, there's also traditional authorities sometimes that has to be consulted. So there's quite an intensive stakeholder engagement process. And then the same goes with, and then when we get to households, there's the usual informed consent, and we would typically have an interview. It depends on what the program is. If we are working on cooking patterns, we would typically interview the person that is responsible for cooking, the adult that's responsible for cooking in the household. But what is interesting in South Africa is we've worked in low-income areas and in medium and higher income areas, but it's much easier. People in low-income areas, to be honest, are more approachable and actually are more welcoming generally than higher income areas. And I think in South Africa, it also has to do with the type of cities we live in higher areas, because of crime sometimes and then security issues, people tend to live behind fences. So it's and they might have dogs and things. So it's if we are talking about spaces, it's a friendlier, in some instances, although from an environmental perspective and from an aesthetic perspective, a low-income area might seem unfriendly. In many instances, from a human interaction perspective, it's actually more friendly than the fenced off middle or higher income areas. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. That's also, I think, very similar in Brazil. I can relate to that. We now would like to open the floor to the audience. If people want to ask a question, you can just unmute yourself and speak up your question, or you can put it on the chat and I can read it out loud. Victor? Yes,
yeah,
yes, please.
Sorry. Yes, thank you for the presentation. So it's very interesting. I would like actually to ask a question about the first part of your lecture that talks about the notion of well-being. I think it was quite interesting and perhaps a bit philosophical. Also, my question is a bit philosophical, but I would like to ask you, what do you think about I mean, you use some criteria to describe what well-being is and how you used it also in your research. And I was wondering, what do you think about these criteria that are we have access to it, and if they really give an entire grasp on what this means for society in general? And also, what do you think about I don't know if you know the GNH index, the Gross National Happiness Index of Bhutan?
Yes,
And I think it could be also quite interesting to compare the criteria that is present also there.
Yes. Yes. So I hope I understood your question correctly, but so maybe I can answer it in this way. Firstly, so just in terms of, I just want to say something about a household, and then I will say something about well-being. So at some point we had to define what a household is, and we actually realized in our team that it's we're not going to choose just for one definition, because if you take a systems perspective, a household would be a complex system with its constitutive elements. If you take a phenomenological approach, you may say that a household is what you find when you get there, and you can describe it. If you take a human needs perspective, you would say a household is the place where people can satisfy their fundamental human needs, and then you can identify. So I think similarly to that, I would say obviously well-being is an unbelievably complex, let's say phenomenon to describe, or what. But I think from different approaches, it can be described in different ways. The way in which we look at, so for me, the insight is actually, and that's why I like the concept of planetary. So if you take quality of well-being, the definition of onto that I refer to takes both human quality of life as well as the planet as non-human systems. And when we work with quality of life, we kind of did a lot to actually work Max Neef's theory out further. So we looked at quality of life as the way in which fundamental human needs are satisfied in the context of the household. So the article that I did not talk about, but you're welcome to read it if you would like to, and I think it may be very interesting for the Just City project, because what we did with a household is we took a household as a complex system, we broke it up in its constitutive aspects, and then we took Max Neef's 10 fundamental human needs and we placed it on a matrix, and we tried to understand the interfaces between all the human needs and all the elements of the household. But you can also do the same with a city as a complex system. If you take the city and you break it up, you try to understand what is all the constitutive elements of the city as a complex system, and you try to understand how does it actually, in terms of the practices that we use, how does it satisfy fundamental human needs? Something like that could also be a very interesting, exercise to undertake. If you, yeah, it might take a while, but it took us a long time to do the household. But ultimately, we found that by going through that, I would almost say intellectual exercise, it actually helped us a lot in the way in which we design our tools that we use for impact measurement. Yes. Sorry, I hope I answered the question. Maybe I did not answer it fully, but
Yes, no, you did. Also the article I've seen that I think Caroline put something about it in the chat. So yes, thank you.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat. I'll read it from Tushar Pradham. As you pinpointed in your presentation that few % of households were not at all using your stove for heating. What new approaches you adopted to encourage them to use it?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. So that particular stoves, to be honest, it's actually not our stoves because we also, in terms of cook stoves, in a rural area, we found that we co-created a self-built stove with women. We tested several stoves. So this is another industry project. So let me just quickly say about the other project. So in the other project, we co-created over a period of 3 to 4 years with a number of women stoves. So we brought them about 6 different types of stove, and not one of the stoves worked for them. And then they said, but we can build a stove ourselves. And in that particular area, the women is usually responsible to build an outside kitchen. So they're very familiar with building. So we took a sewage pipe size combustion chamber, and we designed with engineers a combustion chamber the size of a sewage pipe, and we built with the women self-built stoves. And they started decorating their own stoves and made it part of the kitchen. And that stoves are used quite a bit more than the prefabricated stoves. To answer your question directly, in the particular project that I included in this presentation where people did not use the stoves, we discarded the intervention altogether and said that that intervention is not going to work. And we did not find, so we tested quite a number of alternatives, and the alternative that worked the best there was two different alternatives that worked. So in the one area where people were making open fires outside to boil water for bathing, they used large containers which they put on the open fire the whole day. So those large containers did not work on these small stoves. But what worked very well is the solar water heaters in that area. The solar water heaters actually brought a statistically significant result. And then in an area which was a bit more like a city informal, LPG gas worked better. So a 4-plate LPG gas stove was quite interestingly also not more expensive, because the stacking fuel that people were using for cooking there was paraffin. And paraffin can become quite expensive if you are just using it for cooking. So we also tested the cost pre and post, and in that area, LPG stove worked better. But to conclude, we've found in our work in South Africa, what I have learned is that communities are more diverse than I would have expected. And you have to look in each different community what is working in that particular community. There's not really a one size fits all in our context.
Yeah, thank you. We still have time for questions.
Well, I think I have one question. I said I wouldn't speak, but you know me. How much influence do you have on policymakers? Because you were quite adamant that you guys are using a evidence-based approach, right? So everything you do is very carefully evidence-based, which I think is great, to be honest. That's how policy should be done. How do you have any influence on policymakers with that, or?
I've got two examples where we did make an influence, but it took a very, very long time. So the first intervention, so in South Africa, after the political change in 1994, the government built a lot of these RDP houses, but to be honest, they were quite substandard because they even built it without ceilings. And then we started working with the Thermal and Insulation Association of Southern Africa to see how we can get these low-income households more thermally comfort. And then we actually wrote a policy on thermal efficiency for housing. And they actually, that policy actually became, the government actually took up that policy. So in that particular instance, we worked in that project with Prof. Dieter Hollem, who was an architect at one of the universities here. So in that instance, it was. And the same with the offsets. We are part of an organization in South Africa called the National Association for Clean Air. And they have a lot of academics and practitioners and industries that have a conference once a year. And in 2010, we presented at that conference about the offset opportunity. And the government actually brought out guidelines for offsets in 2016, 6 years later. So that actually also had an impact ultimately. And we also worked with industries there. But I must also say that in South Africa, I don't think policy, the way policy works or gets implemented in practice, works as in, let's say, the Netherlands, or a country where, so you often find that there's many academic dissertations on how to build a low-income house, but you don't see any of those houses when you walk in a low income area. And so the way in which I would almost want to say academic insights gets into policy, firstly, is not that easy. And secondly, often there's very good policies, but there's just a lack of, or it's not only one reason, it may be a lack of funding. In some instances, also a lack of maybe continuity, or in some instances, even competence, if I may say, that results in some of these things not getting implemented.
You're muted, Roberto.
No, I think if I mean, I'm not super familiar with the South African context, but many of our countries, they lack capacity at the very local level of implementation, especially outside of the big cities, right?
Can I follow up on your question about the policy? Because I was wondering, when you were speaking, you said that not always, sometimes you see that after the implementation, some of these projects are not being picked up. But then I wonder, in how far does government understand the kind of projects that do work in certain settings? And do they understand what is needed in certain local neighborhoods or communities?
Sure, that's a very difficult question, in the sense that, and I think also, if I have to be very honest, well, the answer is yes and no. So no, in the sense that I think there's also political issues at stake. So in the discussion between the government and large industries, it's not all, it's sometimes the government brings out the regulations, and it's sometimes in their interest to get money from the private sector to fund things. So if, for argument's sake, the scientific answer is that the industry should not give, it does not necessarily have to give a lot of money to get a good impact, it would not be a very popular answer, because it means that the industry has to, it's in government interest to actually, say to the industry, you have to give more. And the same goes for the industry. They are definitely not innocent. I mean, the industries also have financial, goals, and they are not always, the low income areas in the vicinity of the industry is not always also their first priority, or so yeah. So I think it's a balancing act to try and get all role players to to find a compromise, and to also be ethical, in terms of the goals that we ultimately want to achieve together. So yeah, so I think the government, on the one hand, they do bring out policies which are usually quite good. Sometimes consultants write these policies, to be honest, and it's the policy is very good, but you don't really see that when you walk in a low-income area.
Thank you.
Thank you. There is another question on the Q&A box that asks if other countries, or even other areas within South Africa, if they dump their waste near these low-income areas that you work with.
That's a very interesting question. So we do have dump sites, obviously. So people would not typically dump their waste. So the middle and higher income areas typically, and South Africa is a big country like many others, so I'm generalizing a little bit, but generally you will find that people will take their waste to a dump site there it will be burned, but not into a low income area per se.
Mm-hmm.
You'll more often find that, but what you also find is you do find occasionally that people in cities will dump their waste just somewhere because they don't want to maybe pay to dump it at a dump site or so on. But that's not all that common. But what's very common at the moment in South Africa is that there's a huge problem with waste access on the one hand, in particularly in informal areas, but also with waste delivery. Waste delivery failure is also very high. And so you find at the moment that waste is a tremendous issue in these informal areas. Yeah, so the answer is, I don't think they do it on purpose. They will go and dump there. Most often, it's most often the people living in the close vicinity of that area that will dump. And then I just have to mention one specific issue that's also a huge challenge, and that is things like baby diapers. You won't imagine how many, these diapers are quite expensive, I would say, but you find a lot of these diapers being dumped everywhere in streams and so on, and it's a huge, huge problem.
Thank you. I think if we don't have any other questions, we can close the session here. And thank you, Montagu, for your presentation, for answering all the questions that we had. It was excellent. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Caroline, also for inviting me. Firstly, that I feel honored to be here, and like I said, it was also in my preparations. I read you know, a bit the previous proceedings and the book that came out, and it felt to me that you know, we are very aligned in our approach, and I thought also from a student's perspective, I think it's a wonderful initiative to write a manifesto, because it gives one the opportunity to really internalize the theoretical work and to try to also bring a little bit of emotion and values into it, and then also to make it practically ultimately, because you know, it will not work if it's just a great idea and there's no chance that of having it succeed in practice. So I think a manifesto is a wonderful opportunity to bring all these interesting aspects together, and I wish all the students that are participating also good luck in their preparation of their manifestos, and I will definitely follow the further development of this initiative.
Thank you so much. Thank you for
Thank
your
you.
contribution.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Montagu.
Thank you. So shall I, can I then leave you?
Yes.
Yes,
You
you
can leave,
may
or
leave us.
you can stay as well. But
I think I will be on my way, but thank you so much for that you allowed me to participate.
But
Thank
thank
you.
you for
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.